Welcome back to the Business for Unicorns podcast. My name is Pete Dupuis. I am flying solo today for the rare Just Pete episode, and I want to talk a little bit about a conversation I had during my office hours recently for BFU, specifically on the topic of changing your operating hours and the friction that comes with it. Before I do, I want to give a quick plug to Mark Fisher and specifically his book, Fitness Business Secrets. Mark put together a ton of actionable content following a decade plus of gym ownership, multiple years of running Business for Unicorns here, and it's just jam-packed with info, very affordable. There's a link in the show notes here for you to pick up a copy at Amazon, and I would strongly suggest you do so. All right, so let's get into the topic. I had a conversation recently with a BFU gym owner who was lamenting the headaches associated with announcing a change to the calendar, and more specifically, the pushback that they were getting from clients. And one that was very relatable. Not the first time I've heard it. Also not the first time I have come across it in my own experience, because I've dealt with headaches of this nature in the past. In fact, coming out of COVID, when we reintroduced our strength camps, I had a lot of pushback on some minor shifts in the schedule. And I'm going to get into that a little bit later here in the material. But the ultimate takeaway to start is that people resist change. I allowed my kids, or I should say my wife and I allowed our kids to spend 2 weeks pretty much roaming our neighborhood, swimming in our pool, messing around like idiots without a ton of supervision. They were supervised by the pool. But otherwise, for the first 2 weeks of the summer, they were kind of letting it rip. And this past weekend, we informed them that they had a basketball camp on the books for this week, and they both melted down like it was going to be the worst experience of their life. In fact, my 9-year-old told me he'd rather go back to school than give up his free summer format in exchange for what, in my mind, is a great camp. And you know what? I dropped them off yesterday at camp. They came home from day one, and that same 9-year-old told me it might have been the best day of his life. And the reality is, people are going to push back on anything that disrupts the cadence of their life, their expectations of day-to-day habits, and our schedule at the gym might be one of those things in the eyes of a number of our active clients, and I get it. But there are also a number of reasons why we have to change our schedule from time to time. And so the most common of those, well, one, underwhelming utilization rates. If you know that running a session consistently week over week or day after day in an unprofitable manner needs to stop, it just needs to stop. The numbers don't lie. You need to make sure that you are not giving away money to keep a single or handful of clients happy with a schedule that just doesn't make sense for your operation. So sometimes we just don't enroll enough people in available hours, and things need to shift. Another reason might be staff availability. It's not uncommon for people to lose a staff member, a coach, from time to time. We have coaches move on from our operation, and that can create some taxing scenarios as it relates to how we staff the training floor. And many of our listeners are smaller operations without a ton of staff, and a single staff member, a full-time coach, maybe stepping away can seriously disrupt your ability to deliver the service at 100% of the hours that exist, or I should say existed yesterday when that person hadn't given notice. And so less staff means less availability, and sometimes that's got to be communicated to the community. And then the third, probably most common scenario that I've seen in now 5 years of coaching with Business for Unicorns is that there are times when we come to the realization that there are better places that we could be applying our bandwidth. And so you might have had a quarterly planning session, realized that there's a massive opportunity just sitting on your doorstep, but you just don't have the time to execute. And that's pretty frustrating when you know that that time could exist if you were to shift that one class that has a capacity of 5 to 7 athletes but is currently averaging 1 to 2 bodies. You move that in the schedule, you move some clients to a more desirable hour that's busy but not fully at capacity, and you create some freedom for yourself to build or chase that next big thing. But in the end, there are tons of reasons why we can and should change our schedule periodically. And we just need to figure out how we are going to communicate that with our clients and how we are going to minimize friction and get that message across. So I have 3 tips for how you can safely and effectively execute this moving forward. And a lot of this is analogous to a playbook that we have in our kind of notes here at Unicorn Society for raising your rates, because There's definitely similarities between telling your community that costs are going to go up and telling your community that the hours are going to shift a little bit. And so the first thing I want you to do is your homework. You got to really run the numbers. You got to find out exactly what it costs you to make that session available from a staffing standpoint, maybe for utilities. There are a number of different financial factors that go into having the gym open at a given moment, and you got to run them because you got to be prepared to talk about them. In the early 2000s, there was an NBA athlete named Rasheed Wallace who used to say, "Ball don't lie," and he famously got himself kicked out of, I remember one game where he wasn't even on the court, he wasn't playing, and he yelled, "Ball don't lie," from the sideline because it was his contention that a bad call by a referee followed by a missed free throw was basically retribution for bad calls. And so he'd say, "Hey, the ball doesn't lie. Bad call, that free throw is not going in." And in this case, you need to kind of have a ball don't lie approach to justifying these moves. Sometimes the numbers just plain don't lie. If you look at a client and you say, "You know what, I'm losing money every time I open my doors for this session that you claim is so important to you, and as much as I understand that it is disruptive to your schedule, I can't continue to operate in that capacity, and I'm sure you understand because numbers don't lie."
Hey there, Business for Unicorns podcast listeners. If you haven't had a chance yet to leave us a rating and a review on whatever platform you listen to this podcast, it would be so awesome if you take just a quick second to do that. And here's why. Number one, by leaving us a rating and review, you'll allow our podcast audience to grow so more gym owners can build a life and a gym they love. And number two, by leaving us feedback, you'll help us shape the future of the podcast so we know what you like, we know what you don't like, and we know what types of content is resonating and what else should we create for you. Thank you so much for your consideration. And now back to the show.
So once all this homework is done, you need to be prepared to explain exactly why this is going to happen. Sometimes that is, we're losing money. Sometimes it is, it's costing us the opportunity to improve XYZ for you around our business. But you got to be prepared to talk about it and justify it with conviction. I mentioned earlier that we ran into some pushbacks on scheduling when we reintroduced our strength camps following COVID. And I'll start by saying that before COVID, we had this interesting schedule. It was Monday, Wednesday, and Friday mornings. We had a 5:30 a.m. class, a 6:30, a 7:30, and then we had a 9:30. And interestingly, that hour was because we had a real long-time standing personal training client who we had a ton of loyalty to, and they were very consistent, and they went from 8:30 to 9:30. But we realized after that there was an opportunity to bring people in who needed to drop their kids at school and needed the flexibility to come in after the traditional workday started. So we had a 9:30 slot. And when COVID happened, it shut the whole thing down. And we didn't come back with strength camps right out of the gate, but when we did, we made the decision to just do a 5:30, a 6:30, and a 7:30. Because we looked at all of our numbers and we realized the stats just weren't there to justify a 9:30 class for a while leading up to the time that it all came to a screeching halt. And I had one client in particular who, when we issued kind of the announcement that we were going to be reintroducing strength camps and that the hours would shift slightly, they told me that they weren't going to come back because not having access to the 9:30 was a deal breaker, total non-starter for them. And so I ran the numbers and I came back to that client who actually is still with us now. And I said, "I understand that mindset. I think you should know that you attended the 9:30 class 3 times in the 36 months prior to COVID." Okay. And that number, while it was disruptive and caught them by surprise, it changed the narrative. And they actually were kind enough to say, "You know what, maybe I have a misrepresentation of how I was utilizing the service in the past, but I had no idea that I wasn't a user. I guess I just liked the flexibility of knowing that I could come later if I wanted to, but this probably won't be that disruptive to me after all." And I had done my homework. I was ready to explain why. Now, the last thing that you need to do, and this is very much in line with announcing a pricing increase, is you need to announce when. And so you can't just say, "Hey, effective immediately, we're not doing the 9:30 a.m. class anymore." That is, one, truly disruptive, and two, really short-sighted and honestly rude. This is part of people's schedule, their regimen, their habits. A lot of people build their life out in the weeks ahead or the months ahead. You need to give people some notice. So I typically tell people 60 to 90 days notice for a pricing increase is very fair. Absolute rock bottom bare minimum of 30 days. But the more information you can give them in advance, the better. It's fair. So I would attach a change to the schedule to what you might call temporal landmarks or logical times in the calendar where a shift feels like it makes sense. That might be back to school. When we go into the fall, we're going to adjust the calendar. Everybody's life changes a little bit with the way the school calendar shifts the cadence of things. That's a good start. Maybe it's, hey, on January 1st, we're going to put a new change in place for the year ahead. We're excited for the shift in the schedule. But you want there to be these very firm landmarks that people mentally can attach to with these adjustments, and just avoid anything that is super fast, really abbreviated, and feels hasty, okay? So 3 tips. Do your homework. Be prepared to explain exactly why you were doing this, and then give a reasonable runway for the change so no one feels like you've completely pulled the rug out from under them. Now, the last tip I want to give you, and this one's pretty important. Assuming you've done this homework and you are polished in your delivery, I want you to stop asking permission. There was never a time when you went to your clients after finding out your rent was going up or your cost of doing business was shooting through the roof and said, hey, do I have your permission to raise your rates a little? No, this is your livelihood. You need to do this. You don't go to them and say, can I ask that you allow me to charge you a little bit more? No, you go to them and you say, hey, unfortunately, the cost of doing business has gone through the roof. I'd imagine you're feeling it in a lot of different aspects of your life, and it's happening to us here. As a result, we're going to make a modest adjustment to the pricing strategy on X date in the future. I appreciate you understanding. And this is the same thing. You need to stop asking people's permission to pull an unprofitable, unproductive, or distracting training slot from the calendar. And once you've done that, you're going to free up bandwidth. You're going to free up cash flow to spend on improving their user experience, and you can tell them that. So that's it for today. Hope you like the bite-sized episode. The 12 to 15 minute type window can be consumed pretty quickly. If you do, I would welcome feedback. You can always shoot me an email. I'm at pete@businessforunicorns.com, and I hope to connect with all of you soon.